Up with the espionage cases. This is video 3 for the Spring Break series. Espionage cases. Fear of communism spreading and actual espionage cases in Great Britain, Canada, etc. fueled U.S. cases. So we're not the only ones to do this. Britain and Canada do the same thing. But we're actually going to investigate some people who are suspected of being communist spies. And there are two very important court cases you need to be aware of. And people felt like some of these cases went too far. They violated civil liberties, but at the time there was such a fear of communist takeover or communist infiltration that people went along with them. The first case is Alger Hiss case. The guy's name is Alger Hiss, and there's a picture of him right here. I know you can't really see him, but Alger Hiss is the first major case. There was a guy who was arrested named Whittaker Chambers. That's his name, Whittaker Chambers, who was a confessed communist spy, and who used to relay information to the Soviets. Well, he got a lesser deal. He got a better deal from going to prison and so forth if he ratted out other communist spies, which he starts to do. Well, the biggest guy he names in HUAC is Alger Hiss. Alger Hiss worked for the State Department, had a pretty high up job in the State Department, had actually been with FDR at Yalta and had influence. He didn't work for the State Department anymore, but at one point had. And so, actually, one of the leading investigators from HUAC who goes after Alger Hiss is Richard Nixon. Richard Nixon was an up-and-coming representative from California, and he's actually one of the main guys that goes after Alger Hiss through HUAC. He served in HUAC. So he goes after Alger Hiss, brings him to testify and so forth. Chambers testifies he knows this guy, that he knows he gave out secrets and so forth. Alger Hiss denies the whole thing. Always denied it the whole time, never said he was a spy and so forth. Chambers produced some evidence, some microfilm. What microfilm is, this is back in the day before there's like digital copies, but to have documents saved, you would take basically photographs of the documents, so you have these long rolls of film with documents on them. So there was a bunch of microfilm of these documents that were made on Alger Hiss's typewriter. Or at least that's what Whittaker Chambers says. So the evidence suggests that Alger Hiss did actually make these secret messages on his typewriter and gave it to the Soviets. Alger Hiss, of course, denies this. So HUAC's convinced that the evidence probably is legitimate and probably does come from Alger Hiss, but there's a statute of limitations, which means that the evidence was too old to convict him on. So they can't convict him on treason, which is what this would be. They had instead convict him of perjury, because if it was his and he was lying about it, then he was lying under oath. So Alger Hiss will not be convicted for treason, but he will be convicted for 5 years in prison for lying under oath. So Alger Hiss goes to jail, but never admits to being a spy. In fact, goes to jail for a few years, comes out of being in jail, and lives decades after this, and never admits to being a spy. Well, he dies later on, and in the 90s, when evidence starts to come out from the Soviet side and so forth, there's enough evidence now that suggests that Alger Hiss probably actually was a spy. This is one of the things I'm talking about here, where back in the day we thought that all these guys were innocent, or there was just so much persecution that was unfounded, and now there's been evidence that comes out in the 90s and 2000s that suggests that yeah, he probably actually was a spy, and he actually probably was selling state secrets to the Soviets. So that's the first spy case. The second spy, and this of course makes Richard Nixon a household name too, and he's a big name too as a result. The next court case is Julius and Ethel Rosenberg, who are a married couple. So Julius and Ethel Rosenberg are next. Actually, right here, they're down in the bottom corner. When the Soviets detonated their bomb in '49, the atomic bomb, many Americans believed it was work of spies. One of the German scientists who worked on the bomb was a guy named Klaus Fuchs, who actually was a British citizen at the time, and he admitted to working on the bomb and also selling secrets to the Soviets. But he also, so he got extradited out of here and got convicted elsewhere in Great Britain, not here. But he also, whenever he was interrogated, he admitted that he had been working with the Rosenbergs. So we investigated the Rosenbergs as a result, and we held a trial for this married couple in '51. They pleaded the fifth the whole time. They didn't ever admit to being spies. They didn't convict themselves anyway. But they were convicted of treason in 51 because they, as far as we could tell, they were out helping and abating in the selling these secrets. Essentially, they were the meetings where they traded the secrets and stuff were held at their house in New York. So both the married couples are both of the members of the married couple are convicted of treason, and they're going to get the death penalty. People try to appeal for years. I mean, there's a few years where they get executed, but they'll try to go to the Supreme Court, but the Supreme Court rules that will reject their appeals, and they'll still have to be executed. So after a few years later, they will in fact be executed for treason. Now again, years later, we thought for years that they were innocent, but now we know that he was probably guilty. So Julius Rosenberg, the husband, probably was guilty. However, Ethel maybe knew some stuff about this, but was not actively involved, as far as we can tell. So she actually probably was innocent. He was not, though, based on what we discovered in recent years. So that's your second spy case. And the guy who's the most associated with this era overall is Senator Joseph McCarthy. So he represented Wisconsin. He was a junior senator from Wisconsin. And he was not a great senator. He only been a one-term senator, hadn't really made a name for himself after being in office for 4 years, and he was up for re-election in 1952. So he decided to tap into this communist hysteria to kind of make a name for himself to help him get reelected. So Joseph McCarthy in no way created the communist hysteria. It was already there. It had been around for 5 years before he comes along. But in 1950, he decides to basically actively going after communist spies in the government and makes a name for himself. So he exploits the situation. He does not make it or create it. He exploits the situation. He also did this to help discredit Truman because Truman's still in office at this point as well. The very first thing he does, he has a speech that he makes while I think he's in Wisconsin when he does this, but he makes a speech out in public where he says he has this envelope of 200 names of people who work in the government who are communists. He doesn't say the names because if he did and they were wrong, he could get arrested for it or face lawsuits and so forth. So he doesn't reveal the names at that point. But at that time, he said he had a list of 205 names that were still working in the State Department at that time. So the accusation was widely publicized by the press. And so he rode the wave of anti-communist feelings to make himself one of the most powerful men in the United States because he started holding Senate hearing committees, investigating people in the government, in society, anybody he felt like was a communist, and that's what really became a witch hunt because anybody who he named or thought was a suspect could be brought in for a hearing, and their whole name could be smeared and so forth. And he was very smart about it too, that anytime he named a name, it was in the Senate, because as a senator, you cannot be sued for libel or slander when you say things in the Senate. He never named names outside the Senate, but when he's in the Senate, that's when he named names. But the problem was, the people he targeted were, some of them were obviously innocent, but he just had all his power, people just stayed with him. And he of course abused this. Whenever he made speeches, the numbers would change. Sometimes it was 200 names, sometimes it was 50 names, sometimes 80 names. It just never stayed the same. So that kind of works to make him seem not as trustworthy. But a lot of powerful men got scared of him because he had so much backing. A lot of lower income people in America, middle to lower class people, backed up McCarthy and supported him because they felt like he was, targeting these people who were threats to America. Plus, a lot of people he went after were like richer folk, people who had more money and so forth. And so they felt like, that's why a lot of lower income and middle class people liked him, because he seemed like somebody who was targeting these people who were born with silver spoons in their mouth and so forth. He used a steady stream of unsupported accusations about communists in the government to keep the media on him and to discredit Truman. Like I said, he only named names in the Senate because he had immunity. Working class Americans liked him at first because he was hard-hitting with his remarks, mostly against upper class Americans. He was Republican, so McCarthy's Republican, and Republicans enjoyed his wave of success. So he no one really outright supported him so much as that because he was so popular, the Republicans won a lot of seats in Congress and the presidency in '52, and so they all liked that aspect about him. But no one really came out and supported him directly. Like Eisenhower didn't really approve of his methods, but dare not speak out against him, because if he did, he would be targeted by McCarthy as well. In fact, George Marshall, former Secretary of State and World War II general and hero, was targeted by McCarthy for being a suspected communist, and Eisenhower, who was his wartime friend and so forth, didn't even stand up for him because of fear of being accused as well. That's how powerful McCarthy became. So Republicans rode his wave of power in the 52 elections and got more seats in Congress and won the presidency. And so from 1950 to 54 is when McCarthy has all this influence and power. What finally brings him down is whenever he investigates the Army in 54. So in 54, he finally decides to go after the United States Army, which is a mistake because it's like the symbol of patriotism. McCarthy's reckless behavior was exposed on TV. He always did these investigations, but never really got shown on TV. TV's a new medium now. And in 54, he decided to air the investigations on TV. And he comes across as a bully as a result. So in 54, he goes on TV, does this investigation of the United States Army, and he seems a bully to millions of viewers. And after the investigations are over with, millions of people begin to discredit him. So Republicans and Democrats begin to discredit his actions in the Senate, and after a few months, he gets censored. So he loses his power too. So he gets censored after a few months. So basically the Red Scare and the witch hunt, all that dies in 54 after he leaves, after the Army hearings and so forth, and so all the Red Scare stuff kind of starts to fade away. And 3 years later, he dies a very broken man. He dies from alcoholism 3 years later and so forth. But his impact was really well known and very strong. And there were people who were brave enough to speak out. I mean, there's actors who spoke out against them. One of the famous reporters who spoke out against them, Edward R. Murrow, was a famous reporter who spoke out against McCarthy's actions. But either way, McCarthy had a lot of popularity. So with that, we're going to wrap up the Truman years, and we'll end this video as well. So Truman, again, will finish out his second term in 1953. He doesn't run for president again in 52. The second Red Scare, the Korean conflict, and the loss of China made Truman getting reelected seem very unlikely. So because of the second Red Scare, because Republicans criticized him as being weak, McCarthy criticized him as being weak, because he lost China, because of the Korean conflict still going on, Truman didn't really have a chance, and Democrats didn't really have a great chance of winning an election in 52. So he decided to retire. He goes back to private life in Missouri. Republicans blamed him for the mess in D.C. at the time, but overall, Americans came to respect Truman's decisions for having to deal with a very tough situation for his time. So he got criticized a lot at that point, but as time has gone on, Truman's got a lot more respect for what he did, because he did about as good a job as anybody could have in that situation without provoking a war with some other country. So we'll stop there with our third video in the series.